how do I start a walking program? And is dirt or pavement better? Everyone wants to know, like, should I do 1 mile, 3 miles? But you really want to figure out what your level is first. It doesn't do you any good to work at a hypothetical level that's going to make you sore, set you back for 2 or 3 days. You really want to start where you are. So if you aren't really sure, think about how much you think you can do and start with that. And you can either focus on distance or time. Now you want to pick an area to walk that is fairly level. You don't want something with a lot of hills, especially if you haven't been walking. One of the first things to know is that you want to go out and start walking, moving at a self-selected pace. So something that's comfortable, something that you can maintain a conversation at and go for either a certain distance or a certain time, amount of time, and see where you're at with that. So if that's 10 minutes and you feel like I am good for today, then that's where you're starting. If that happens to be a 1/4 mile, a 1/2 mile, a 1.5 miles, that is where you are. And so that's where your starting point is going to be. Now, on that first time, you do not want to do as much as you can possibly do and not be able to do any more. You actually want to stop when you start to feel fatigued, when you feel like, yeah, it's probably time to turn back. Because that first couple of times, I would rather you do a little less than what you could do and start to develop that base, what you're going to build off of and be successful at it, rather than push yourself so far that you're going to ruin your whole program before you even get going. So start with that. Find that amount that you can do, but you could also do it again tomorrow. And start with that distance. How you progress from there is about 10% per week. So this is assuming that you are walking at least 3 days a week. Now, when you start a walking program, you want to start every other day, not every day. And part of this, it gives you that day of recovery, so that way you continue to feel good. A lot of times, like, we go out because we're really motivated on that day one, and we do something multiple days in a row, and typically it's by day 3, things start falling apart. We want to avoid that if we can. We want to start with every other day. We give you a rest day in between, and that keeps you out of that trouble. Now, after you've done that for a couple of weeks, if you want to move up to every day, that is completely fine. That's a great option for you. But you want to start with that every other day to ensure your success. Now, once you've done something 3 times, you can increase that by 10%. This 10% rule keeps you out of that flare-up, that irritation, that felt great, so I'm going to do twice as much tomorrow, and that sets you back. So it's a good rule of thumb. Does it have to be exactly 10%? No. But it keeps you in that nice, steady progression ballpark, and out of the 100% increase and the loss. So what that means is if you are, say, walking a mile, you walk a mile 3 times, and then on that 4th time, things are going good, so then you up it to 1.1 miles. Now, dirt versus pavement is also a really common question. Pavement, concrete, is harder on your body, it's less forgiving. You get more impact with it. So as a general rule, your dirt paths, things like that, are going to be easier on you. But, and this is a huge but, your path has to be even. It has to be fairly solid. It can't have a lot of obstacles in it. Because if your path has a lot of roughness and variation to it, that's going to challenge your balance. That is going to make walking more difficult. Particularly if you're having to pay attention to every step, it uses that energy to control where you're at versus being able to focus on that cardio endurance portion of getting out and walking, which is really more of our bigger goal with a walking program. Balance is a little bit separate thing. So if you have a nice path to be able to walk on, great. If you have a path that's really rutted and there's lots of rocks and it's muddy, not your best option. You're actually much better to go with concrete. Now with roads, one of the things you have to pay attention to is if you are going to be walking on an actual road that is crowned and sloped, you have to be more careful if you're hypermobile, because walking on the side of the road, when you're on the slope, it kind of forces you to be a little bit more to the side and have one leg that's constantly down lower than the other. And so there are ways you can manage that with trying to walk on alternating sides, and depending on your pain level, how much that plays into potential symptoms or problems. Finding an option where you can walk and get going is really that underlying goal. So if you live in a more populated city or town where you have sidewalks and a lot of street crossings, sometimes that's a tougher option too, because if you're constantly having to cross traffic, you get a lot more stop and go. And with a walking program, really we want to get you moving and get you working on that consistent endurance flow, more so than the start and stop. Now that might mean that you just walk around your block and you just do that multiple times versus going through a neighborhood. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not much different than all the athletes that train on a track. And then you can change directions which way you go. But usually blocks are big enough that you don't have to worry about direction. So look at a couple of those things. Work on that gradual progression. Once you get your distance or time, whichever factor you're paying attention to, more up to what you want that to be, that is the point that you start to work on incline, both going uphill and downhill, and gradually working that in. Then you can also start working on speed, where you're trying to walk faster. Typically the beginning and starting of program levels, you just go with whatever speed is comfortable to you, and you will naturally increase as your body is able to. That's where you want to stay. Once you've got your level where you want it. So for example, if my goal is I really want to be able to walk 3 miles 3 days a week, and I've got my route figured out, then that's where I can start pushing myself to move a little faster. But don't worry about speed in the beginning. A lot of times as soon as we start trying to go faster, our form falls apart.